Somewhere on the planet right now, there is a body of water so deep that if you began falling into it this instant, you would still be falling when the sun came up tomorrow. Not falling the way you imagine falling, not the long, bright plummet of a cliff, the wind tearing past, the ground rushing up to meet you in a handful of seconds. That kind of falling is brief. That kind of falling is almost merciful in its speed. This is the other kind. This is the slow kind. The kind that takes you down through a darkness that keeps getting darker, through a cold that keeps getting colder, through a weight that keeps getting heavier, hour after hour, while the world you came from shrinks to a coin of light far above your head, and then to nothing at all. And here is the part that almost no one stops to consider. The part that turns the whole idea inside out the moment you really hold it in your mind. You would not hit the bottom for a very long time. And by the time you did, you would no longer be you. We think of the ocean as something we fall on, a surface, a hard flashing skin of blue that you strike and skip across and sink a little way beneath before you either swim or drown. That is the ocean we know. That is the ocean of beaches and harbors and the warm, shallow places where light still reaches the sand. But that ocean, the one we picture when we picture falling into water, is the thinnest possible film stretched across something else entirely. Something we have no instinct for. Something that does not behave like falling at all, because down there is no floor waiting to catch you within any time frame your body was built to comprehend. There is a place in the western Pacific Ocean where the seafloor does not gently slope away into a deep that eventually levels off. There is a place where it simply opens, where the bottom of the world drops out from under the rest of the bottom of the world and keeps going, down past every depth you have ever heard a number for, into a wound in the planet so deep that you could lower the tallest mountain on Earth into it and watch the summit vanish beneath more than a mile of black water. It has a name, this place, though the name does almost nothing to prepare you for it. The Mariana Trench. And at its lowest point, in a cleft narrower and stranger than anything the word trench suggests, there is a spot called the Challenger Deep, where the floor of the ocean lies nearly 11 kilometers below the waves. 11 kilometers, straight down, into the dark. I want you to sit with that direction for a moment, because the direction is the whole story, not the distance. We cover 11 kilometers every day without a thought, on a highway, in an hour, half asleep. The horror is not in the length. The horror is in the down. We are surface creatures. We were built for a world of horizons, for a flat, green earth that runs away from us in every direction, toward a line where the land meets the sky. We have almost no native sense for down, no instinct for what it means to keep descending when the descending will not stop. And the Mariana Trench is the most absolute expression of down that exists anywhere on the surface of this planet. It is the single deepest place you could fall to without leaving the world. So let us do the unthinkable thing, here, safely, in the only way it can ever be done safely, in the imagination, with a voice walking beside you the whole way down. Let us say you fell. Let us say that by some accident the mind does not want to picture too closely. You went over the side of a ship far out over the trench, into water so deep that no land has been visible in any direction for hundreds of kilometers, and the surface closed over your head, and you began to sink. This is what would happen, not the version that ends in a single sentence, and then you would die. The longer version, the true version, the one that follows you all the way down through every layer of the descent, through everything that lives down there and everything that does not, through the slow undoing of your body and the slower indifference of the place that receives it. Because the truth of falling into the Mariana Trench is not a moment of terror. It is a journey, The longest, strangest, loneliest journey a human body can take while still, technically, remaining on Earth. And somewhere along the way, somewhere in the dark between the place where the light dies and the place where the planet folds back into itself, the question we begin with is going to change. It always does. What begins as a morbid little thought experiment, a campfire question, a "what would happen to me?" is going to open out, the way the trench itself opens out, into something far larger and far quieter and far harder to climb back out of. A question about how small the lit world really is, about how thin the lid is on the world we think we live in, about what is down there, beneath every wave you have ever watched break, waiting in a darkness that has never once concerned itself with you. But all of that is far below us. Every fall begins at the surface, in the light, where the water is warm and the sun still touches your skin, and the horror has not yet started, because it does not start the way you think it will. So that is where we begin, at the top. In the last few seconds you would ever spend in a world that makes sense. Before you go over, I want you to understand exactly what you are falling into. Not so that you can prepare for it, there is no preparing for it, but because the scale of the thing is itself part of what happens to you down there. The numbers do something to a person. They are part of the descent. The Mariana Trench is not a hole. That is the first correction your imagination needs. When you hear the word trench, you picture something with steep, close walls, a narrow gash you could see across, like the trenches men dug into the fields of Europe a century ago and crouched in and died in. The Mariana Trench is nothing like that. It is a curving scar in the floor of the Pacific more than 2,000 kilometers long, longer than most countries, a crescent of crushed and folded planet arcing through the dark beside the islands it is named for. If you somehow drained the ocean and stood at the edge of it, you would not see across it. You would see a slope of seabed falling away in front of you and curving out of sight, down into a haze of nothing, and you would understand at once that whatever was at the bottom of it was not coming back into view. And at the deepest seam of that enormous scar, the Challenger Deep, the floor lies just shy of 11,000 meters below the surface of the sea. Let me try to make that number stop being a number. Take the highest mountain on Earth, the one whose name has become a synonym for the limit of human reach, the one that kills people every year just for trying to stand on top of it. Set it down at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. Watch it sink into the trench until its base settles on the floor. Now look up toward the summit, the place where climbers freeze and gasp at the edge of the survivable world, the literal roof of the planet. That summit would still be more than 2 kilometers underwater. You could not see it from the surface. You could not reach it with a free dive or a scuba tank or anything a normal human body could survive. The highest place we can stand would be drowned, with 2 kilometers of black water still stacked on top of it, and the surface of the sea would lie far above even that, flat and bright and indifferent. The waves folding over the buried roof of the world without the faintest idea it was down there. That is the place you are falling into, and almost no one has ever been to the bottom of it. I want you to feel the strangeness of that, because it cuts against everything you have been taught about the modern world, the world of satellites and submarines and cameras everywhere, the world that supposedly has no corners left unseen. In the entire history of our species, across every century, every empire, every billion of us who has ever lived and died, the number of human beings who have descended to the deepest point of the Mariana Trench can be counted on your fingers, with fingers to spare. More people have stood on the surface of the moon, 250,000 miles away, across the dead vacuum of space, than have ever stood at the bottom of the deepest place on their own planet. In a single busy season, More climbers crowd onto the summit of the highest mountain than have reached the trench floor in all of recorded time. It is not because the trench is far. It is right here. It is on this planet, beneath this same sky, a few kilometers straight down from a patch of ocean you could sail a boat across in an afternoon. It is closer to every human being alive than the nearest national capital. You could, in the most literal physical sense, reach the edge of it by stepping off a ship and beginning to sink. And that is exactly what makes it so much stranger than space. Space is far. Space announces its hostility with distance. You have to cross an unimaginable emptiness even to begin. But the trench asks nothing of you. The trench is right beneath the keel. The only thing standing between you and the deepest place on Earth is the simple fact that you cannot survive the trip. That the way down is short and easy and entirely fatal. And the place you would arrive is so far outside the conditions your body needs that to call it part of the same world you live on starts to feel like a category error. You live on the surface. You have always lived on the surface. Everyone you have ever loved has lived and died on the thin, warm-lit skin of this planet, in the few meters above and below the line where air meets water and light still means something. And the Mariana Trench is the farthest you can possibly get from that skin without leaving the planet behind. It is the deep end of the deep end, the bottom of the bottom. The place the rest of the deep ocean falls into. So when you go over the side, you are not falling into the sea. Not really. You are falling out of the only part of the world that was ever meant for you, into the largest, oldest, least visited environment that exists. And then falling past even that, into the deepest, strangest, most unreachable corner of it. And for the first few seconds, you would not feel any of this. For the first few seconds, the water would be warm. The surface of the open Pacific over the Mariana Trench is, on a good day, almost unbearably beautiful. The water is a blue so deep and so clear, it seems to glow from within, lit from below by sunlight that sinks through it and scatters back up, so that the sea itself becomes a kind of lamp. It is warm at the top, bathwater warm in the tropical sun, the kind of warmth that makes the ocean feel like an invitation rather than a threat. There is no hint at the surface of what lies beneath. There never is. The deepest place on Earth wears on its face one of the prettiest skins the planet has. So when you first go under, the shock is not cold. The shock is sound. The moment the surface closes over your head, the world goes quiet in a way that land never prepares you for. The wind, the slap of waves, the engine of the ship, your own breathing, all of it is gone, replaced by the strange, muffled hush of being underwater, where sound moves differently and your own heartbeat becomes suddenly, intimately loud. Light still pours down around you in long, shifting columns, the surface a rippling silver ceiling just overhead, close enough to touch, close enough that every instinct in your body is screaming the obvious truth. The surface is right there. Swim. Swim up. And you could. In these first seconds, you absolutely could. You are still in the part of the ocean that belongs to you, the sunlit layer, the only zone where a human being can survive unaided, and it is not deep. The light reaches down through it in shafts. Fish move in it that you might recognize. If you kicked hard right now, you would break the surface in a breath or two and gulp the air and live. But let us say you don't. Let us say something has gone wrong, that you are hurt or exhausted or weighed down, or simply that the cold is already pulling the strength out of your limbs faster than you expected. Let us say the surface, for whatever reason, is no longer something you can reach. Then the kicking stops. The body, denser than the water it floats in once the lungs give up their air, begins to do the only thing it can do. It begins to sink. And this is the first thing the trench teaches you before you have even left the light, that falling here is slow. Agonizingly, impossibly slow. You do not plunge. A human body does not knife down through water the way it would drop through air. The sea holds you, resists you, slows you to a crawl, so that you descend not in a rush, but in a kind of terrible drift. A meter, 2 meters every second, no faster, sinking through the bright water with the unhurried patience of something that has all the time in the world. And the ocean does have all the time in the world. You do not. That is the cruelty of it. The fastest part of you, the panicking animal mind that wants this to be over one way or another, is trapped inside the slowest possible fall. Above you, the silver ceiling begins to recede. Not quickly, just steadily, surely, the way the platform pulls away from a train you have already failed to catch. The columns of light grow longer and thinner. The warmth of the surface water, that bathwater warmth that felt like an invitation, begins, almost imperceptibly, to cool against your skin. You are still in the sunlit zone, the layer the scientists call the epipelagic, the top 200 meters where nearly all the life of the open ocean crowds together to stay near the light. It is the only floor of the ocean's enormous house that gets any sun at all, and it is a thin floor, a fifth of a kilometer in a sea that runs to 11. But it is where everything lives, because it is where the light is, because light is food, and food is life. And below this layer, the sun's gift runs out. You are sinking out of that layer now. You are sinking out of the lit world, the living world, the only world that was ever yours. And the deeper you go, the more you will understand that everything you ever called the ocean was happening in this thin, bright film at the very top, and that the real ocean, the vast, dark majority of it, was always somewhere else, somewhere below, where you are headed. Look up one more time, while you still can. The surface is still visible, a wavering brightness far overhead, the last clear sign of the world you came from. Take it in, because in a few more minutes, that light is going to begin to leave you, color by color, in an order so precise and so strange that the deep has its own way of taking the daylight apart. And once it is finished, you will never see daylight again. The first color the ocean takes from you is red. It happens almost immediately, faster than you would believe. Within the first 10 or 15 meters of your descent, while the surface is still bright overhead and the warmth has barely begun to fade. Red light has the longest, laziest wavelength of all the colors the sun sends down, and it is the weakest swimmer. Water drinks it up greedily near the top, so that by the time you are a few stories deep, red has simply ceased to exist. If you were bleeding, your blood would not look red down here. It would look black, or a sickly green, the way everything red turns down here, drained of the warmth that made it red in the first place. The most alarming color a body can produce, the color that means danger in every human language, the color of fire and blood and warning. Gone in the first few seconds, swallowed by the quiet blue. Then orange goes, then yellow. The sun is dismantling its own light around you, one band at a time, the way you might take apart a chord by lifting your fingers from the keys, lowest note first, until only the highest remains. By 100 meters, The world has lost almost everything warm in it. The reds and oranges and yellows that paint the surface world, the colors of skin and sunlight and ripe fruit and human faces, are simply not present anymore. They cannot reach this far. You have descended out of the part of the spectrum that life on land is built around, into a world lit by only the cold end of the rainbow. What remains is blue, and green, fading, and then, deeper, only blue. But a blue unlike any blue you have known. Not the cheerful blue of a summer sky or a swimming pool. A blue with no bottom to it. A blue that is less a color than a substance. A blue that thickens and darkens around you the deeper you fall, until it stops feeling like light at all and starts to feel like a kind of luminous dark, pressing gently against your eyes, growing more solid by the meter. You are entering the twilight zone now. The scientists call it the mesopelagic, the middle ocean, the layer that runs from 200 meters down to 1,000. It is one of the strangest and most important places on the entire planet, and almost no one ever thinks about it. And you are about to fall straight through the heart of it. This is the zone where the light is dying, but not yet dead, where there is just enough of a glow filtering down from above to cast the faintest shadow, to hint at shapes, to keep some ghost of the surface world clinging to the water, but not enough to see by. Not really. Not in any way that would help you. It is the longest dusk in the world. A perpetual deepening evening that never tips over into full night and never brightens back toward day, holding for hundreds of meters in a gloom that the human eye strains and fails to resolve. Things live here in enormous numbers. More fish by some measures than in all the rest of the ocean combined. But they live by a different set of rules than anything you have ever met. Rules written for a world of permanent half-light, and you would not be able to see most of them even as they moved past you in the dimming blue. And they would be able to see you. That is the part that should unsettle you, drifting down through the twilight. You are losing your sight by the meter, going blinder with every stroke of depth. But the creatures of the Twilight Zone have spent millions of years evolving eyes for exactly this gloom. Huge eyes. Eyes tilted upward, watching the faint light from above for the silhouette of anything that falls or swims between them and the surface. Because in the Twilight Zone, to be seen against the dying light is to be eaten. Everything down here is hunting the shadow above it, and now there is a new shadow in the water. A large, slow, strange one, sinking down out of the bright, and the eyes of the twilight are turning toward it. You would not see them looking. You would only feel, perhaps, the sense that the dimness around you was no longer empty, that something in the failing blue had noticed the falling shape and was keeping pace with it, just out of the range of your useless surface eyes, curious, patient, unafraid. By 600 or 700 meters, the last of the daylight is nearly gone. You are descending now through the final reaches of the twilight, the place where even the most stubborn blue gives up. And here something happens that almost everyone gets wrong when they imagine the deep ocean. They imagine it dark, yes, but empty dark. A featureless black void, the absence of everything. It is not empty. As the last sunlight fails, the dark around you begins, very faintly, to fill. There are lights down here. Not from above, from the things that live in it. At first you might dismiss them, a flicker at the edge of your vision, a smear you blink away, the kind of phantom light the eye invents when starved of the real thing. But they keep coming. A pulse of cold blue-green off to your left, there and gone. A long, slow trail of sparks, like an ember breaking apart, drifting somewhere below. A sudden flash, startlingly close, that resolves into nothing before your eyes can fix on it. You are falling now into a world that has given up on the sun entirely and learned to make its own light. And you are arriving at the precise depth where the last of the daylight and the first of the living light overlap, where the surface's glow finally surrenders the water to the creatures that glow on their own. This is the boundary, the threshold of the true deep. Below this, there will be no more sunlight, ever, in any amount, by any measure, all the way to the bottom of the trench. Below this, every photon of light you will ever encounter again will have been made by something alive, for its own purposes, to lure, to warn, to hunt, to hide, to speak in a language of flashes you cannot read. You are crossing out of the world the sun built and into the world the dark built. And the dark, it turns out, is not empty at all. The dark is inhabited. The dark is busy. The dark has been alive and glowing and going about its enormous secret business this entire time beneath every sunny day you ever enjoyed, and you are only now sinking helplessly through it, finding that out. And there is something else moving through the twilight around the falling body, something so vast that it is almost impossible to picture, something that happens here every single day, and that almost no one on the surface has ever heard of, because the creatures of the Twilight Zone do not stay in the twilight. Every night, as the sun goes down on the world above, they rise, countless billions of them. Small fish, squid, shrimp, jellyfish, an uncountable multitude, lift up out of the gloom and swim toward the surface under cover of darkness, to feed in the rich, shallow waters, while the predators that hunt by sight cannot see them. And every morning, before the light returns, they sink back down into the safety of the dark. It happens across the entire ocean, all over the planet, every night, in a tide of living things so enormous that it is, by sheer mass of animals moving at once, the single largest migration on Earth. Larger than any herd, any flock, any movement of life the surface world has ever produced. And it is invisible. It happens in the dark, beneath the waves, witnessed by no one. The greatest movement of life on the planet, rising and falling in perfect silence every day of every year. And the surface world goes about its business with no idea at all that beneath it, the ocean is breathing. Vast multitudes climbing toward the light each night and retreating each dawn. A rhythm older than us, larger than us, entirely beyond our notice. The falling body would meet this migration, somewhere in the dimming blue. It would fall against the grain of it, sinking down through a rising tide of life, passing through clouds of small, glittering creatures climbing the other way, all of them moving by instinct toward a surface the body is leaving behind forever. For a few minutes, the dark would be full of company, life in every direction, brushing past, scattering at the strange descending shape. And then the body would fall below the range of the migration, below the deepest reach of the nightly climb, into water that the great tide never enters, and the company would thin and fall away and be gone. And the body would understand, if it could understand anything, that it had just passed through the last layer of the ocean that still has any connection to the sun at all. The last place where life still rises each night to remember the light. Below this, there is no rising. Below this, nothing climbs back toward the surface. Below this, everything only falls. But the lights are not the most important thing happening to you right now. While your eyes have been adjusting to the loss of the sun, something else has been mounting around your body, silent and invisible and far more dangerous than the dark. Something that has been building since the instant you went under and has not stopped for a single meter since. the weight of the water, the pressure. And it is time to talk about what the pressure is going to do to you, because it is going to do something that almost no one expects, something far stranger than being crushed. Every 10 meters you descend into the sea, the weight pressing on your body increases by the equivalent of the entire atmosphere of the planet. Stop and let that settle, because it is one of those facts that sounds like a metaphor and is in fact a literal accounting. Right now, standing on the surface of the Earth, you have the whole sky on top of you, the full vertical column of the atmosphere, miles and miles of air, pressing down on every square inch of your skin. You do not feel it because you grew up inside it, because your body is built to push back against exactly that much and no more. That is one atmosphere of pressure, the baseline, the only weight your body has ever known. Now, begin to descend. At 10 meters down, barely past the bottom of a swimming pool, the water above you is already pressing on you as hard as that entire sky. You have doubled the weight on your body in the length of a few seconds fall. At 20 meters, you have tripled it. The pressure does not ease as you go. It does not level off. It simply keeps stacking, 10 meters at a time, another whole sky, and another, relentlessly, all the way down, with the perfect indifference of arithmetic. By the time you reach the bottom of the twilight zone, where the lights are beginning to bloom in the dark, the pressure on your body is around 100 times what you felt at the surface. 100 skies. By the bottom of the trench, if you make it that far, and you will, the body always makes it that far, it will be more than 1,000. More than 1,000 atmospheres. The numbers stop meaning anything at that scale, so let me give you the one that does. At the floor of the Challenger Deep, the pressure on every single square inch of your body would be something on the order of 8 tons. The weight of several cars balanced on a space the size of a postage stamp, multiplied across every postage stamp of skin you have. A pressure that could fold a steel submarine like wet paper, that has crushed instruments built by the best engineers alive, that represents one of the most extreme physical environments human beings have ever tried to reach anywhere, on this world or off it. So you would expect, falling into that, to be crushed, to be flattened, compacted, squeezed down into something small and dense, the way a hand crumples a paper cup. That is what everyone imagines. That is the nightmare picture. The human body, somewhere in the deep, collapsing under the weight of all that water into something unrecognizable. But that is not what happens, and the truth is so much stranger. Here is the secret that the deep keeps about pressure, the thing that makes it behave so differently than our intuition insists it should. Your body is mostly water. So is everything alive. And water, liquid water, is very nearly incompressible. You can press on it with the entire weight of the ocean, and it barely yields. It does not squash down into a smaller volume the way air does. So the parts of you that are made of water, which is most of you, your muscles, your blood, your organs, the soft, wet bulk of you, those parts do not get crushed at all. The pressure presses on them from outside, and they press back from inside with their own incompressible water, and the two balance, and the tissue holds its shape. You could, in a strange and grim sense, descend into the deepest trench in the world and arrive at the bottom looking, from the outside, almost like yourself. Almost. Because while the watery parts of you ride the pressure out unbothered, there are other parts of you that cannot. The spaces inside you that hold air. And those are where the descent does its terrible work. Your lungs are two soft bags of air, and air, unlike water, compresses ferociously under pressure. As you sink, The air in your lungs is squeezed smaller and smaller, the lungs shrinking inside your chest, the pressure crushing the gas down into a fraction of its volume. Long before the deep zones, far shallower than most people would guess, the air spaces in your chest are compressed past anything your ribs and tissues can withstand. The sinuses behind your face, the delicate air-filled chambers of your inner ears, the gas in your gut. Every hollow, every pocket, every place where your body holds a little air for its own surface-dwelling reasons becomes, under the mounting weight, a place where the body fails. Quietly, internally, invisibly, the soft architecture collapsing inward toward the vacuum the pressure is trying to make. But I want to be honest with you about the order in which these things happen, because the order matters, and the order is, in its way, a mercy. You would not be conscious for most of this, long before the pressure does its deepest work, long before the trench begins to truly reshape you. Something simpler and faster would already have ended the part of you that experiences anything at all. The cold, the dark, the absence of air. The body, sinking helplessly through the failing light, would lose consciousness within the first minutes, in the warm or barely cooling water of the upper hundreds of meters, far above the zones where the real horror of the deep begins. Which means that the journey I am taking you on, the long fall through the dark, the lights, the creatures, the pressure, the trench, is, past a certain early point, a journey your body takes without you. The you that panicked at the surface, that wanted to swim, that felt the warmth fade and the dark close in. That you would be gone long before the deep ever got its hands on you. Gone gently, if the deep is ever gentle, in the upper water, while there was still a ghost of light overhead. And so we have to do something now, in this telling, that the deep does to everyone who falls into it. We have to let you go. We have to follow the body down without its owner, the way the trench will follow it down, the way the dark will. Because the body keeps falling. The body does not stop when consciousness does. The body keeps sinking, slowly, patiently, for hours more, down through layers it can no longer feel, toward a bottom it will never know it reached. Stay with it anyway. Stay with the falling shape, even though the person is gone. Because everything that is about to happen, everything strange and beautiful and terrible in the deep below, happens to that falling shape, and to follow it down is the only way any human mind will ever travel this far. We cannot send our bodies, so we send the next best thing. We send our attention, riding the slow descent of a body that can no longer carry it, down into a dark that no living person has ever truly entered and returned from to describe. So, the person is gone. The body falls on, and the dark below it begins to fill with light. At 1,000 meters down, the last memory of the sun is gone. There is no up anymore, not in any way the eye could tell you. If the body's eyes were still capable of seeing, they would find no difference between looking toward the surface and looking toward the floor. In every direction, there is only black. A black so complete, so total, so unbroken by any natural glow, that it is unlike any darkness you have ever stood in on the surface, where there is always some faint leak of light, some star, some distant town, some gray that the eye can eventually adjust to. There is nothing to adjust to here. This is the dark the planet keeps under its skin. This is the midnight zone. The scientists call it the bathypelagic, and it is not a thin layer like the ones above. It is enormous. It runs from 1,000 meters down to 4,000, 3 vast kilometers of perpetual night, and it is, by sheer volume, one of the largest single living spaces on the entire planet. More room for life exists in this one black layer than in all the forests and plains and mountains of the land combined, and the body is falling into the very top of it now, beginning a descent through 3 kilometers of dark that will take, by itself, the better part of an hour. And the dark is alive. I told you it would be, but nothing prepares you for the way it actually arrives. Not as a single light, but as a slow revelation that the blackness around you was never empty, that it was teeming the whole time, that you simply did not have the eyes to read it. Down here, the overwhelming majority of living things make their own light. Not a few, not the famous exceptions, the majority. By some counts, the great majority of all the animals in the deep ocean carry, somewhere on their bodies, the ability to glow. The midnight zone is the most bioluminescent place on Earth. A vast, dark theater filled with creatures that have each, independently, in their own way, solved the problem of the eternal night by becoming, themselves, the only light there is. And they do not glow for your benefit. That is the thing to understand about the lights in the deep. Every flash, every pulse, every slow drifting glow has a purpose, and most of those purposes are hunger and fear and deception. The lights are weapons. The lights are lures. The lights are lies told in a language of cold fire to creatures that have never seen anything else. Somewhere in the dark, the body is now drifting through. There are fish that dangle a glowing bait in front of their own mouths. A single point of light, swaying on a thin stalk grown out of the head, hovering in the black like the one warm thing in a frozen world, irresistible to anything small and hungry enough to swim toward it. And behind it, in the dark, the mouth waiting, the teeth waiting, the whole patient ambush of an animal that has turned the deep ocean's hunger for light into a trap. There are creatures that, when threatened, do not flee into the dark. They cannot. The dark is everywhere. But instead vomit a cloud of glowing particles into the water, a blinding burst of living light, and use the predator's startled blindness to vanish. There are animals studded with rows of tiny lights along their bellies, tuned to exactly mimic the faint glow filtering from far above, so that a hunter looking up sees no silhouette, no shadow, only an unbroken field of dim light where the prey has erased its own outline by glowing in perfect counterfeit of the sky it can no longer see. This is the world the body is sinking through now, a world of light used as a knife. And the falling shape drifting down through it would seem to these creatures like nothing they have ever encountered. A thing that does not glow, that makes no light, that simply falls, dark and silent and large, down through their lit and lying world. Some of them would scatter from it. Some, the boldest or the hungriest, would approach, drawn by the disturbance, by the slow displacement of water, by the simple novelty of so much falling matter in a place where matter is scarce. They would circle the falling shape, study it with their enormous upturned eyes, taste the water around it, and finding it strange, or finding it edible, they would begin, in their own slow way, to take it apart. Because down here, in the dark, food is the rarest thing there is. The midnight zone makes nothing of its own. There is no sunlight, so there are no plants, no algae, no green engine turning light into life. Everything that lives in the deep ocean lives, ultimately, on scraps that fall from above, on the slow, steady rain of dead things drifting down out of the lit world, and on the rare, enormous, almost unbelievable windfall of a large body sinking into a place where large bodies almost never come. To the creatures of the midnight zone, the falling body is not a horror. It is a feast. It is a once-in-a-generation gift, a sudden, impossible abundance dropping out of the dark, and they would gather to it the way the starving have always gathered to a sudden meal, quickly, greedily, with no thought at all for what it had been. And the creatures that gather to it would be unlike anything the surface world has prepared you for. Down here, in the perpetual famine of the Midnight Zone, evolution has made strange and desperate things. There are fish with mouths that open wider than their own bodies, hinged jaws, and stomachs that can stretch to swallow prey larger than themselves. Because in a place where a meal might come once a month or once a year, you cannot afford to let anything pass. You must be able to eat whatever you find, however big, whenever you are lucky enough to find it. There are fish whose entire bodies have been reduced almost to nothing but a mouth and a stomach and alluring light, the rest of them sacrificed to the single, overwhelming priority of eating. There are creatures so soft and so faint that they are barely more than organized water, drifting through the dark on almost no energy at all, surviving by needing almost nothing. They have built their bodies around scarcity. They are the architecture of hunger itself, shaped over millions of years by a world where food is the rarest thing there is. And now, into that world of permanent famine, a body has fallen, an abundance beyond reckoning, and they would come to it the way the starving come to anything. There is something almost tender in it, if you can find your way past the horror. The body that was, a few hours ago, a person, that had a name and a history, and people who loved it, and a mind full of ordinary, worried thoughts about ordinary things, is now, in the dark 3 kilometers down, becoming the most generous thing in the entire ecosystem. It is feeding the deep. It is giving the rare creatures of the Midnight Zone a measure of life they almost never receive. The matter that built the body, the carbon and the protein, and the slow accumulated stuff of a human life, is being returned to the living world. Not the world above, the world it came from, but a different world, an older and stranger one, that takes everything that falls into it and asks no questions, and makes new life out of the wreckage. The body falls, and is eaten, and is scattered, and goes on falling, lighter now, changed now, deeper now, into the dark. And I want you to notice the quiet inversion that has happened here, somewhere in the dark, without anyone deciding it. Up at the surface, the body was the center of its own world, the thing that mattered most, the thing whose survival was the whole point. Down here, 3 kilometers into the black, it has become something else entirely. A resource, a gift, a passing abundance in someone else's life. It is no longer the protagonist of anything. It is no longer even a someone. It is matter, falling, being put to use by a world that has its own concerns and its own hunger, and no particular interest in where the matter came from or what it used to be. This is the first lesson the deep teaches everything that falls into it, and it teaches it without cruelty and without mercy, simply by being what it is. You were the center of your world. You are not the center of this one. This one does not have a center. This one was here long before you fell into it, and it will be here long after the last of you has been scattered into the dark. And still, it has not reached the bottom. That is the thing the mind keeps refusing. By now, an hour in, 2 hours in, 3 kilometers of black water passed. Every instinct says the fall should be over, the floor should be here, the journey should end. On land, you cannot fall for 3 kilometers. There is nowhere on the dry surface of the earth where such a fall is even possible. But the body is not even halfway to the floor of the trench. The Midnight Zone alone is 3 kilometers deep, and beneath it lie zones the body has not yet reached. Depths that make the Midnight Zone seem shallow. A darkness that this darkness is only the beginning of. The fall goes on. The lights thin out. The cold deepens. and around the falling shape, drifting down with it, keeping pace with it, there begins to appear a soft and constant snow. It looks, at first, like the body has fallen into a slow snowfall. Pale flecks drift past in the black, thousands of them, tens of thousands, a gentle, endless downward sift of small white particles falling at the same patient speed as the body itself, so that they seem almost to hang motionless in the water, companions on the long descent. If there were any light to see by, the dark would be full of this falling snow, a soft, pale blizzard sinking forever through the deep. It is not snow. It is the dead. The scientists call it marine snow, and it is one of the most quietly important phenomena on the entire planet, and almost no one on the surface has ever heard of it. Every particle of it is a fragment of something that was once alive in the sunlit world far above. A flake of dead skin, a scrap of a decaying creature, a clump of waste, a shred of a plant too small to see, bound together with mucus and the cast-off matter of the living surface. Up in the light, things die constantly, by the trillions, every second of every day. And what they leave behind does not simply vanish, it sinks. It drifts down, slowly, out of the bright world, into the dark. A continuous, gentle fallout of death descending through the entire depth of the ocean, falling for days, for weeks, sometimes for months, before it finally reaches the bottom, if it ever reaches the bottom at all, before something eats it on the way down. This snow has been falling for as long as there has been an ocean. It has never stopped. Not for a single moment in all the hundreds of millions of years that life has filled the sea has the marine snow ceased to fall. A perpetual, silent, planet-wide descent of the dead, drifting down through the dark, feeding everything that lives below the light. It is the food of the deep. It is the slow river of energy that connects the bright living surface to the black, starving abyss, the only steady gift the sunlit world sends down to the dark one. Every creature in the deep ocean lives, in the end, on this snow, on the patient downward rain of everything that dies above. And the body is part of it now. That is the strange recognition that settles over the descent at this depth. The body, falling through the marine snow, is not separate from it. It is simply the largest flake. It is one more dead thing sinking out of the lit world into the dark, drifting down at the same patient speed as all the rest, on its way to feed the same hungry depths. The snow that falls around it and the body that falls through it are the same thing. Matter from the surface, returning to the deep, going down to be eaten and broken and scattered, and made into the strange life of the abyss. The body has joined the oldest migration on the planet. It is falling with the dead, as one of the dead, into the dark that the dead have always fed. The body has passed 4,000 meters now. It has fallen out of the midnight zone and into the layer beneath it, the abyssal zone, the abyssopelagic, named for the Greek word that means bottomless, and the name is almost honest. This is the layer that covers most of the deep ocean floor across the entire planet. If the trench were not here, if the body had fallen almost anywhere else in the open Pacific, this is roughly where the journey would end, on the broad, flat, abyssal plain that stretches across the true floor of the world, 4 kilometers down, in eternal cold and dark and silence. But the body did not fall almost anywhere else. The body fell over the trench. And so when it reaches the depth where the ordinary ocean floor would be, the depth that is, for almost the entire planet, the very bottom, there is no floor. There is only more dark. The seabed that should be here, the solid ground that catches everything else that falls this far, is not here. It has dropped away. The body sinks past the level of the deepest abyssal plains on Earth, past the depth that is the floor of the world almost everywhere else, and keeps going, down into the gap where the bottom of the ocean simply isn't. Imagine falling toward what you are certain is the ground, falling for hours, through dark, through cold, through the slow snow of the dead, and arriving, at last, at the depth where the ground has always been, for every other place on the planet, and finding instead that it has been taken away, that beneath the bottom of the world there is more world, that the floor you were falling toward is itself suspended over a deeper emptiness, and you are about to fall through the place where the floor should have been, into the part of the planet that lies below the bottom. That is what it means to fall into a trench. Not to fall to the bottom of the ocean, to fall past it. To sink through the floor of the world and keep going into the deepest layer of all, the one named after the underworld itself. There is a name for the place the body is now entering, and the people who named it were not being poetic. They were being accurate. The hadal zone, from Hades, the underworld, the realm of the dead in the oldest stories our species ever told. When the scientists who first measured these depths reached for a word to describe the layer below 6,000 meters, the layer that exists only in the trenches, only in these rare, deep wounds where the seafloor plunges far below the level of the abyssal plain, they did not reach for the language of measurement. They reached for the language of myth. They called it after the place beneath the world where the dead go down and do not return. And once the body sinks past 6,000 meters, that is precisely where it is, in the hadal zone, in the deepest, rarest, least explored environment that exists anywhere on the surface of the Earth. You have to understand how rare this place is to understand the strangeness of arriving in it. The abyssal plain, the 4-kilometer deep floor that covers most of the planet, is vast and common. It is, by area, the single largest landscape on Earth. But the hadal zone is not common. It exists only in the trenches, only where the ocean floor folds down into these narrow, deep clefts. And those clefts make up a tiny fraction of 1% of the whole seafloor. If the abyssal plain is the great floor of the world, the hadal trenches are the cracks in that floor. Narrow, scattered, separated from one another by thousands of kilometers of ordinary deep, each one a sealed and isolated pocket of the deepest dark, cut off from the others, as remote from each other as islands across an ocean. They are the most extreme habitats on the planet, and they are so rare and so scattered that the life in each one has, in many cases, evolved in near total isolation, becoming things found in that trench and nowhere else on Earth. And there is life here. Even 6, 7, 8 kilometers down, in a cold of barely a degree or two above freezing, in a dark that has never known light, under a pressure that would crush almost anything you could name. There is life. Not the empty graveyard that anyone would expect. Life. Pale, patient, strange, persistent life, clinging on at the very edge of what is possible, in a place that seems built from the ground up to forbid it. The body, sinking into the upper hadal, would begin to pass them. Drifting through the dark, somewhere around 7,000 or 8,000 meters, it might pass close to a creature that is, in its own quiet way, one of the most remarkable animals on the planet. A small, pale, almost translucent fish, soft-bodied and gentle-looking, with a faintly comical face and a tail like a ribbon, that lives deeper than almost any other fish on Earth. The snailfish. It does not look like a survivor. It looks delicate, fragile, half-finished, like something the deep could erase with a thought. And yet it thrives here, in the hadal, deeper than the great sharks and the fearsome anglerfish and all the famous monsters of the shallower deep would ever dare to go. Because it has solved a problem that almost nothing else has solved. It has found a way to keep its body from coming apart under a pressure that should tear the very molecules of life to pieces. Because that is what the pressure does, this deep, to the chemistry of the living. It is not only bodies the deep pressure crushes, it crushes proteins, the tiny folded machines that every living thing is built from and runs on. At these depths, the pressure is so immense that it begins to deform the proteins themselves, to unfold them, to stop them from holding the precise shapes they need to do the work of being alive. And the snailfish has packed its tissues with a special chemical, a molecular brace that holds its proteins in shape against the crushing weight, that lets the machinery of life keep running where it should have long since failed. The deeper a fish lives, the more of this chemical it needs. And that is the strange and beautiful catch, the reason there is a floor even to life itself. Because to go deeper, a fish needs more of the bracing chemical, and more, until, somewhere around 8,200 meters, it would need so much of it that its body could not function any longer. At that depth, the very chemistry of survival hits a wall. It is not that nothing has tried to live below it, it is that the laws of the molecules forbid it. So there is a depth, down here in the dark, below which no fish can exist. Not this one, not anyone, not anywhere on Earth. A hard floor under the whole vertebrate world, written not in geology, but in chemistry. A line drawn through the deep, beneath which the kind of life that we are, the kind of life with backbones, the kind that includes every fish and bird and beast and human that has ever lived, simply cannot go. And the body is about to fall past that line. It is about to sink below the deepest depth at which any creature remotely like itself could survive, into a final stretch of trench where even the snailfish cannot follow, where the last of the familiar living world is left behind, and only the strangest and toughest things on the planet remain. What lives below the limit of the fish? Smaller things, simpler things, things built on a different and more ancient plan. There are creatures down here at the very bottom of the trench that look like nothing so much as pale shrimp. Amphipods, the scientists call them, scavengers, swarming the deepest floor in numbers, descending on anything that falls from above and stripping it clean with a speed that is almost frightening. They're the cleanup crew of the deepest place on Earth, and they have evolved tricks that border on the impossible. Some of them line their own guts with metal, with aluminum drawn out of the sediment and the very mud of the trench, armoring themselves from the inside against the things they eat. They are among the only animals that thrive at the absolute bottom of the Challenger Deep, and when a large body falls into their world, a windfall beyond anything their tiny lives could have anticipated, they would find it within hours, and swarm it, and reduce it, patiently and completely, to bone, and then to less than bone, in a feeding that no human eye will ever witness. And there are stranger things still. Down in the hadal, in the sediment of the trench floor, there are living things the size of a fist that are, against every intuition, single cells, vast solitary organisms, each one a single enormous cell that build delicate structures out of the mud and the marine snow and sit on the deepest floor of the world, alive by a definition we are still arguing about, doing whatever it is they do, in a dark and a cold and a pressure that would be the end of nearly anything else. There are pale sea cucumbers that crawl across the trench floor, grazing the fallen snow. There are anemones rooted in the deepest sediment, waving in currents so faint and so slow that a single drift of water might take a lifetime to cross the trench. There are things down here that have never been named, that have been glimpsed once and never again, that exist in the human record as a single grainy frame from a camera that happened once to be pointed in the right impossible direction at the right impossible moment. This is the world the body is sinking into now. Not a void, not an emptiness, the most extreme inhabited place on the planet, crowded with the toughest, strangest, most isolated life that exists anywhere on Earth. Life that has been here for longer than there have been humans, that will be here long after, that has never once in all that time had any reason to know that a thing called the surface even exists. The body falls toward them out of a world they have no concept of, carrying in its tissues the memory of a sun they have never seen, the chemistry of a warm, bright place that, to them, is pure rumor. And they will receive it the way they receive everything that falls, as food, as matter, as one more gift from the unknowable dark above. And almost no human being has ever seen any of this. That is the thing to hold on to, drifting down through the hadal toward the floor. Everything I am describing, the snailfish at the edge of the possible, the metal-gutted swarms, the giant single cells, the pale crawling things on the deepest floor, we know about almost none of it firsthand. We know it from a handful of expeditions, a scattering of cameras lowered on cables, a few brief visits by a few brave people in machines built to keep the ocean out. The hadal zone is one of the least explored environments in the entire reachable universe, and the trench the body is falling into is the deepest part of it. And the number of humans who have ever traveled this deep and come back is so small that you could fit every one of them across all of history into a single small room. So before the body reaches the very bottom, before it completes the fall that almost no living thing has ever made and survived, I want to tell you about the ones who did. The handful of human beings who went down here on purpose, sealed in steel, and looked, and came back. Because their story is the strangest counterpoint to the body's silent fall. They went down the same dark column, into the same crushing deep. But they went down protected, and they came back up, and they are almost the only ones who can tell us anything at all about the place the body is about to arrive. On a January morning in 1960, two men climbed into a vessel that looked less like a submarine than like a strange industrial accident. A fat steel float the length of a building with a tiny cramped sphere bolted to the underside of it, barely wide enough for the two of them to sit knee to knee in the dark. The float was filled with gasoline, of all things, because gasoline is lighter than water and would not compress under pressure, and so it gave the craft just enough buoyancy to be controllable. The sphere beneath it, the part that held the men, was made of steel walls so thick that the windows were little more than narrow cones of glass. And through those windows, the two of them intended to do something no human being had ever done: to descend to the very bottom of the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in all the oceans of the world. One of them was a Swiss engineer, the son of a man who had spent his life building craft to go to extremes. First up into the high atmosphere in a balloon, and then down into the deep sea in vessels like this one. The other was an officer in the United States Navy. Together, they sealed themselves into that small steel sphere, and the craft was released, and it began to sink. Down through the warm surface, down through the dying light, down through the midnight zone and the abyssal dark, down the same long column the falling body takes, but slowly, deliberately, under control. Two living men riding the descent on purpose into a place that wanted them dead. The fall took nearly 5 hours. 5 hours of sinking through the black, the two of them crouched in the cold sphere, watching the depth gauge climb past numbers no human had ever survived. listening to the small sounds of the craft, feeling the temperature drop, knowing with perfect clarity that a single flaw in the steel around them, a single crack, a single failed seal, would not give them time to so much as register that something had gone wrong. At those depths, a failure of the hull would not be a leak. It would be the ocean entering all at once, with the force of all those thousands of atmospheres, faster than thought, faster than fear. They knew this. They went down anyway. And about halfway down, in the dark, they heard it. A sharp, loud crack that rang through the sphere, that they felt in their bodies. The sound of something failing under the mounting pressure. One of the outer windows had cracked. They did not know how badly. They did not know if it would hold. They looked at each other in the dim light of the sphere, two men sealed in steel at the bottom of the world. And they made a decision that tells you everything about the particular kind of person who goes down into the deep on purpose. They kept going. They reached the bottom. After 5 hours of falling, the sphere settled with a soft puff of disturbed sediment onto the floor of the Challenger Deep, nearly 11 kilometers down, deeper than any human being had ever been or, for more than half a century afterward, would ever be again. And in that moment, two men became the first, and for a long time, the only members of our entire species ever to stand at the deepest point on the planet. They looked out through the narrow window, and the most remarkable thing happened. The thing that should have changed how the whole world thought about the deep. The thing that almost no one remembers. They saw a fish. There, at the very bottom of the world, in the deepest place the ocean reaches, in a dark and a cold and a pressure that every scientific instinct said should be utterly lifeless. There, drifting in the beam of their light across the pale sediment, was a living creature. A flatfish, they thought, though no one has ever been entirely sure, and some have doubted the sighting ever since. But the men who were there believed they saw it. An animal, alive, going about its existence on the floor of the Challenger Deep, in a place where life was supposed to be impossible. If a fish could live there, in the single most hostile spot in all the seas, under the full, crushing weight of the entire ocean, then there was nowhere in the deep, no matter how extreme, where life had not already found a way. The very bottom of the world was inhabited. It had been inhabited the whole time by things that had never needed us, never known us, never once depended on the sunlit world we thought was the whole of life. They stayed at the bottom for only about 20 minutes. The cracked window, the cold, the dwindling margin of safety. There was no reason to linger, and every reason to leave. They released the iron weights that held them down, and the gasoline float began to lift them, and they rose back up the long, dark column toward the surface, toward the light, toward the world of air and warmth that they belonged to, and the deep did not. They surfaced into the afternoon. They had touched the bottom of the world and returned. And then, and this is the part that I find almost impossible to comprehend, we did not go back. Not the next year, not the next decade, not for more than half a century. After two men risked their lives to reach the deepest place on the planet, after one of the genuine landmark feats of human exploration, we simply turned away from it. We left the Challenger Deep alone. In the same span of years, we sent men to the moon and back 6 times over. We flung machines past the outer planets and out of the solar system entirely. We built telescopes that peered to the edge of time. And the deepest place on our own planet, the place a fish had been seen, alive, against every expectation, we did not visit again for 52 years, until a filmmaker, of all people, built his own submersible and went down alone, becoming only the third human being ever to reach the bottom, more than half a century after the first two. Think about the imbalance in that. Think about what it says about us, about where we choose to point our attention, our money, our wonder. The deepest place on Earth is not far. It is not unreachable. It is right here, beneath the waves, a few kilometers straight down from a patch of sea you could sail to in a day. And we have visited its floor fewer times than we have visited the moon. We turned our faces up, toward the stars, toward the bright, distant frontier that captures the imagination, and we turned our backs on the dark frontier beneath our own feet, the largest unexplored place on the planet, the deep that was here the whole time, asking nothing, waiting. The body does not know any of this. The body, falling now through the last kilometers of the trench, does not know that two men once rode this same descent and lived, that a fish once drifted through a beam of light at the bottom of the world, that the deepest place on Earth has been touched by human hands a handful of times across all of history, and then left alone. The body simply falls, the way everything falls into the deep, silently, slowly, without witness, into a dark that does not care whether it has been visited before. And then, at last, after hours of falling, the body reaches the bottom. It does not arrive with any drama. That is the first thing to understand about reaching the floor of the Challenger Deep. There is no impact, no crash, no sudden stop. The body has been falling so slowly through water so dense that the meeting with the bottom is almost gentle. A soft settling, a slow contact with the pale, fine sediment of the trench floor, raising a faint, slow cloud of silt that hangs in the black and then, over long minutes, drifts back down to settle again. The body comes to rest on the deepest ground on the planet, 11 kilometers of ocean stacked above it, the full weight of the deep pressing down. And around it, in every direction, the absolute and total dark of the hadal floor. What is it like, this place the body has finally reached? We know a little from the handful of cameras and craft that have made it down. It is flat, mostly, a pale, soft, almost featureless plain of fine sediment, the accumulated marine snow of millions of years, drifted down from the sunlit world and settled here, kilometers thick, into a floor as soft and fine as flour. It is cold, just above freezing, a cold that has never varied and never will. It is silent, but not the silence you imagine. The deep has its own sounds, the groan of the planet's plates grinding against one another far below, the trench itself being slowly, endlessly crushed and folded as one piece of the Earth's crust dives beneath another. Because that is what the trench is, in the end. Not a hole, but a seam. A place where the floor of the Pacific is bending down and sliding beneath the edge of another plate, descending back into the hot interior of the planet. A slow-motion collision that has been happening for millions of years and will go on for millions more. The body has come to rest at the bottom of a wound that the planet is, very slowly, in its own deep time, swallowing. And it is dark in a way that has no equivalent anywhere a human being normally goes. Not the darkness of a moonless night, where the eye eventually finds the faint gray shapes of the world. Not the darkness of a sealed room, where you know the light switch is on the wall and the sun is waiting outside. This is a darkness that has never, in the entire history of the planet, contained a single particle of sunlight. It is a darkness 11 kilometers thick, pressing in from every direction, absolute and complete and unbroken. And it has been exactly this dark, in exactly this place, for longer than there have been creatures with eyes to be troubled by it. The body lies in it now, on the soft, pale floor, under the full weight of the deepest ocean on Earth, in a cold and a dark, and a silence so total and so ancient that the words we use for those things up in the bright world barely reach down here at all. Cold, dark, quiet. They are surface words. They were made for surface places. They do not begin to hold what it is actually like at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, where the body has come, at last, to rest. And there is life here, on the deepest floor. The body would not be alone for long. Within hours, the scavengers would find it, the pale, swarming amphipods drawn from across the trench floor by the chemistry of a large body leaking into the water, gathering in their thousands, beginning the patient work of return. They would strip it. Over days, over weeks, the body that fell from the surface would be taken apart, molecule by molecule, atom by atom, and folded into the strange, sparse life of the deepest place on the planet. The carbon that was a human being would become, in time, the substance of creatures that have never seen the sun. And what the scavengers did not take, the sediment would. The marine snow would keep falling, as it always has, settling over whatever remained, layer by patient layer, burying it slowly beneath the accumulating dust of the dead, until in time, a long time, the deep's kind of time, there was nothing left to mark that anything had fallen here at all. The trench would close over the memory of the body the way it closes over everything, without notice, without resistance, without the faintest stir of recognition. The deepest place on Earth received a visitor, briefly, the way it receives everything that falls into it. And then it went on exactly as it had before, exactly as it has for millions of years, exactly as it will for millions more. The fall that began at the warm, bright surface, in panic and light, in the desperate desire to live, ends here, in the cold and the dark and the silence, in a quiet so complete and so ancient that it makes the entire human story feel like a single brief sound, made once, fading already, swallowed by a dark that was never listening. And that, the simple physical end of the journey, is where most tellings of this would stop. The body reaches the bottom. The body is consumed. The end. A grim little answer to a morbid little question. But I do not think that is where the real story is. I think the real story is the one that opens up after the fall is over. The larger, quieter, stranger questions that the descent leaves behind, drifting in the dark like the silt the body raised when it landed, taking a long, slow time to settle. Because the body's fall was only ever a way in, a thread to follow down into the deep, a single falling shape to give us a reason to descend somewhere we could never otherwise go. And now that we are here, now that we have followed it all the way to the bottom of the world, the question is no longer what happens to a body in the trench. The question is what it means that this place is here at all. What it means that the largest, oldest, deepest part of our own planet is a place we have visited fewer times than the moon. What it means to live your whole life on the thin, bright lid of a world whose deepest room you will never enter. And those questions go down further than the trench does. Let me tell you something about the trench that we have only recently learned and that I find harder to shake than anything else about it. We thought for a long time that the deepest places in the ocean would be the cleanest, the most untouched, the last truly pristine wilderness left on the planet. So remote, so impossibly deep, so far beyond the reach of human hands that nothing we did up in the light could ever possibly reach them. If there was one place on Earth that humanity had not yet stained, surely it was here, at the very bottom, in the deepest seam of the deepest trench, kilometers below anywhere a person could go. We were wrong. When scientists finally brought back samples from the deepest hadal trenches, when they sent their instruments down to the very floor of places like the Mariana and analyzed what the creatures there carried in their bodies, they found us. They found, in the tissues of the tiny scavengers that swarm the deepest floor on Earth, in animals that have never seen the surface and never will, the chemical signatures of human industry. Pollutants we manufactured, compounds that should not exist in nature at all, that we made in factories in the bright world and released decades ago into the surface of the sea, and which drifted down over the years on the falling snow of the dead, accumulating in the bodies of the creatures at the bottom of the world, until those creatures, in the deepest, most remote, most supposedly untouchable place on the entire planet, were more contaminated than animals living in some of the most polluted rivers near the cities where the chemicals were made. Sit with the weight of that. There is no longer any part of the planet that is untouched. Not the deepest, not the most remote. We reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep with our pollution before we ever reached it again with our bodies. The trench, which we have visited in person only a handful of times in all of history, which we have explored less thoroughly than the surface of the moon, that same trench is already full of our fingerprints, already carrying the slow chemical residue of a species that has barely glimpsed it. We managed to contaminate the deepest place on Earth before we managed to understand it. We touched it with our waste before we touched it with our knowledge. And there is something almost unbearably sad in that order of events. To poison a place before you have even seen it. To leave your mark on the bottom of the world before you have so much as looked at it properly. The creatures at the floor of the trench, the pale, tough, patient things that found a way to live in the most hostile place on the planet, that asked nothing of us, that did not even know we existed. They are carrying our chemistry in their bodies, our mistakes, our carelessness, the cast-off molecules of a bright, loud world they will never see, accumulating quietly in the dark, a contamination they cannot escape because there is nowhere deeper to go. We are the apex of the falling snow. Everything we make, everything we discard, eventually drifts down. And the deep, which takes everything that falls, has taken that too. And it is not only the old pollution. There is plastic at the bottom of the trench. Bags, fragments, the cast-off debris of the surface world, found drifting on the deepest floor on Earth by the cameras of the few craft that have made it down. The very deepest point that human beings have ever reached, the bottom of the Challenger Deep itself, when a man went down there a few years ago in a new craft to make one of the rare visits in all of history to the deepest place on the planet, he looked out the window at the floor of the world, the deepest, most remote, most pristine spot that exists anywhere on Earth, and he saw, lying in the pale sediment, a piece of our trash. And I keep coming back to the order of it, the sequence, the terrible chronology. We did not explore the deepest place on Earth and then carelessly let our waste follow us down. We did it the other way around. The waste went first. The pollution arrived at the bottom of the Challenger Deep decades before we did, riding the patient downward snow, accumulating quietly in the dark, settling into the tissues of creatures we had not yet discovered, in a place we had visited fewer times than the moon. By the time a human being finally returned to the deepest floor on the planet and looked out the window, the trace of us was already there waiting. In the sediment, in the scavengers, in a piece of trash lying on the deepest ground in the world. We reached the bottom of the world with our garbage before we reached it with our understanding. We left our mark on a place before we ever bothered to learn its shape. And there is no undoing that now. There is no deeper place to put it, no cleaner trench to retreat to, no bottom left that we have not already touched without meaning to. The deep took everything that fell, the way it always has. And some of what fell, this time, was us, or the cast-off residue of us, sinking into the last unspoiled dark on the planet, and spoiling it before we knew it was there to spoil. There is no longer anywhere the snow does not reach. There is no longer any bottom deep enough to fall below us. But I want to come back to the body, or rather, to what the body's fall reveals, because I've been telling you a story about one falling shape, and the truth is far larger and far stranger than one shape, far larger than one trench. The body fell for hours. Think about what that means, what that hours-long fall actually measures. It is not measuring the depth of one strange and rare place. It is measuring the true thickness of the living world. Everything you have ever known, everyone you have ever loved, every event of human history, every war and city and song and idea, all of it happened in the thinnest possible film at the very top of that fall, in the first fraction of the first kilometer, in the sunlit skin of the sea and the thin band of breathable air just above it. That is the entire human range. That is the whole of the world we actually inhabit. And beneath it, the body kept falling for hours, through layer after layer of a world that has nothing to do with us, that dwarfs us, that was here long before us and will be here long after. A world so much larger than our own thin, habitable margin that the comparison stops making sense. We say we live on the Earth, but that is not quite true. We live on the very top of the Earth, on its bright, thin lid, in a film so shallow that the body falls clear out of it in the first minute. The real bulk of the living world, the great, dark volume where most of the planet's living space actually is, lies below, in the cold and the dark, in the deep ocean that the body fell through, and we almost never visit. By the measures that matter, by sheer habitable volume, the deep ocean is the largest living space on the planet by an enormous margin, and the part of it we have actually seen, actually explored, actually laid eyes on, is so small that the honest scientific estimates put it at a tiny fraction of 1%. We have explored less than 1% of the largest part of our own world. Try to hold the proportions of that in your mind, because they are almost impossible to hold. On land, life is essentially a thin coat of paint. It clings to the surface, to the soil, the canopy, the few meters up and down from the line where air meets earth. Stack the tallest tree against the deepest root, and you have, at most, 100 meters or so of living vertical space, and that is generous. The land is a stage with almost no depth. Life on land is a mural painted on a wall. But the ocean is not a mural. The ocean is a cathedral, kilometers tall, and life fills it from the high vaulted ceiling all the way down into a darkness the eye cannot follow. The average depth of the sea is close to 4 kilometers, and at the trench the body fell into, it runs to nearly 11. The space available for living things in the ocean is, by careful estimate, the overwhelming majority of all the habitable room on the entire planet. And the slice of it we know, the warm, lit shallows where we swim and fish and film our nature documentaries, is a sliver so thin it barely registers against the whole. We have explored the mural. We have cataloged every brushstroke of the lit world, and we have looked into the cathedral just far enough to know that it is enormous and dark, and full of something we cannot see. And so, almost everything down there, almost everything in the deep majority of our own planet, is unknown. Not poorly understood, unknown. Never seen. The creatures the body passed on its way down, the snailfish and the swarming amphipods and the giant single cells, are the merest scrapings off the edge of what is down there. For every one we have managed to film, there are uncounted others we have not. Every time we send a camera into a new patch of the deep, we find things we have never seen before. Not occasionally, not as a rare prize, but routinely, as the ordinary expected outcome, dozens of new species from a single voyage, animals no human has ever laid eyes on in all of history. The deep is not running low on secrets. It is barely beginning to give them up. The honest estimates of how many species remain undiscovered in the ocean run into the millions. Millions of kinds of living things sharing this planet with us right now that we have never seen, never named, never suspected. We tell ourselves we live in a known world, a mapped world, a world we have explored and charted and understood, where the age of discovery is over and there is nothing left to find. And it is one of the strangest and largest lies we tell ourselves. We have mapped the land, the minority of the planet, the thin, dry margin. The majority, the great, wet, dark bulk of the world, remains almost entirely unexplored. We have more detailed maps of the surface of Mars, a planet no living thing has ever touched, than of the floor of our own ocean. We have driven robots across the dust of another world and photographed individual stones, while the actual bottom of our own sea, across most of its vast extent, remains a blur, a guess, a low-resolution rumor stitched together from satellites that can only sense the deep indirectly. We do not have a map of our own world. Not really. Not the way you think we do. And the body falling through it, hour after hour, through layer after dark layer, is the truest map there is. Not lines on a page, a fall. A measure of how deep the unknown goes, taken in the only unit that really conveys it, the long, helpless descent of a single shape, sinking out of everything we know, into everything we don't. There is a question hiding underneath all of this, and it is time to bring it up into the light, because it is the strangest part of the whole story. Why? Why have we done this? Why has a species as restless and curious and relentless as ours, a species that crossed every ocean, climbed every mountain, walked on the moon, flung machines past the edge of the solar system, why has that same species left the largest part of its own planet in the dark? Why do we have more maps of Mars than of our own seafloor? Why did we abandon the deepest place on Earth for half a century while we went to the moon 6 times? Why does the exploration of the deep ocean receive a tiny sliver of the wonder, the funding, the imagination that we lavish so freely on the sky? Part of the answer is simple, and we have already met it. The deep is brutally hard to reach, harder in some ways than space, because of that relentless mounting pressure that no cleverness fully tames. It is genuinely difficult and dangerous and expensive to put human eyes on the bottom of the sea. But difficulty is not the whole answer, because space is also brutally hard and brutally expensive, and we pour ourselves into it without hesitation. The deeper answer is about something stranger than money or engineering. It is about direction. It is about which way we want to look. And the truth, written deep into the oldest layers of what we are, is that we want to look up. There is something in us, something ancient, maybe something built into the kind of creature we are, that turns our faces toward the sky. We have always done it. We told stories about the stars before we told stories about almost anything else. We placed our gods up there, in the heights, in the light. We dreamed of flight, of ascent, of rising, long before we had any means to leave the ground. Up is the direction of aspiration. Up is where we imagine the future, the divine, the transcendent. Up is hope. And the deep is the opposite of all of it. The deep is down. The deep is descent and pressure and crushing dark and cold. The deep is, in the oldest layers of the human imagination, where the dead go, where monsters live, where the light cannot follow. We named its deepest zone after the underworld. To rise is to ascend toward heaven. To fall the way the body fell, down through the dark into the hadal deep, is to sink toward everything we have feared since before we had words for fear. And so we built our great romance of exploration around the wrong frontier. We made the stars our destiny and the depths our nightmare. We funded the dream and neglected the fear. And the result is one of the strangest imbalances in the entire human story. We have sent our machines billions of kilometers across the void to planets no living thing will ever touch, while leaving most of our own ocean floor in a darkness we have barely entered. The frontier we chose to chase is almost infinitely far away and almost entirely hostile to life. The frontier we chose to ignore is right beneath our feet, teeming with living things, possibly even the place that life itself began. We looked past our own origins to stare into the empty sky. And maybe that too says something true and a little sad about what kind of creature we are. We would rather reach up toward the clean, cold beauty of the stars than down into the dark, wet truth of where we came from. We would rather dream of leaving the planet than understand the planet we are on. The deep is too much like the things we spend our whole lives trying not to think about. Darkness, weight, descent, the dissolving of the self into something larger and indifferent. So we look away from it. We look up. And the largest part of our own world goes on in the dark beneath us, unwatched, unmapped, unmourned, while we point our telescopes at the sky and call that exploration. But I want to go deeper still, past the body, past the trench, past the question of why we look away, because there is a layer beneath all of those, and it is the one that unsettles me most, and it does not go away no matter how good our machines become. Even when we do go down, even when we send our cameras and our craft into the deep, we may be missing most of what is actually there. Not because it is hidden in the dark, because it is happening in ways we were never built to perceive. Think about how we see the deep. We see it, almost always, by bringing light to it, by switching on a lamp and looking at what the lamp reveals. But the deep is a world without light. The creatures there have spent millions of years building their entire existence around the absence of it. So when we arrive and flood a patch of the deep with a blinding artificial beam to film it, we are not seeing the deep as it is. We are seeing the deep as it looks when an alien searchlight is suddenly switched on in the middle of a world that has never known one. Creatures flee. Creatures freeze. Creatures that hunt by their own faint glow are erased, washed out, made invisible by our floodlights. The behaviors we capture on film are, in many cases, the behaviors of animals reacting to the violence of being abruptly illuminated. We are like someone trying to study a dark forest at midnight by crashing through it with a spotlight, scattering everything, and then describing what we saw fleeing from us as though it were ordinary life. The deep we have filmed may be, in some real sense, a deep that is reacting to us, And the true deep, the undisturbed deep that exists when no light has ever shone, may behave in ways we have almost never witnessed at all. And it goes further than light. The creatures of the deep communicate, hunt, and sense the world through channels we are only beginning to suspect and may not be able to follow. There is, threaded through the entire deep ocean, a language we barely read, the language of living light. Most of the animals down there make their own light, and they do not make it at random. They use it to lure, to warn, to find mates, to signal, to deceive, flashing and pulsing in patterns that almost certainly carry meaning, an entire visual language written in cold fire across the dark, most of which we have never decoded and may never decode. We see the flashes, we do not understand what they say. We are travelers in a country where everyone is speaking, constantly, in a language we do not know, filing reports on the sounds without grasping a single word of the conversation. And here is the discovery that should make you wonder how much of that conversation is happening in channels we cannot even detect. Nearly all the light in the deep is blue, the color that travels best in seawater, the color almost every deep creature makes, and almost every deep eye is built to see. Red light dies within a few meters in water. Nothing in the deep ever evolved to see it, because in the deep, red light effectively does not exist. And yet there is a creature down there that learned to make red light and to see it when nothing else can. It moves through the dark, carrying its own private illumination in a color invisible to everything around it, lighting up its prey in perfect detail, while that prey perceives nothing at all. Hunting with a beam that only it can see, operating in a channel of reality that, to every other creature in its world, simply is not there. And the biologists who study this draw the obvious, chilling conclusion. If one creature found a way to perceive a channel that the entire rest of its world is blind to, then how many other secret channels are there? How many invisible signals, invisible conversations, invisible wars are passing through the deep right now, in registers we have never thought to look for, between creatures we have barely met, in senses we do not possess. We explore the deep with eyes and instruments built for the surface, tuned to the narrow band of things our kind of life happens to notice. And the deep may be saturated with phenomena that fall entirely outside what we are equipped to detect. The one creature that cheats the rules of light is simply the one we happened to catch. The deep may be playing 1,000 games we cannot even see the board for. This is the most humbling form of the unknown, and the body's fall takes us right to the edge of it. It is one thing to say we have not yet been to most of the deep, that we lack the ships and the money and the time. That is a problem we can imagine solving. It is another thing entirely to suspect that even where we have looked most closely, we have been perceiving only a thin slice of what is actually there, that the deep is not just physically beyond our reach, but in part, perceptually beyond our grasp, living its true life in colors and senses and signals we were never built to share. We could explore every cubic meter of the trench and still, in this sense, fail to know it. Because to truly know it might require senses we do not have, a way of being in the world that no surface creature could ever fully wear. And maybe that is the final wall. Maybe there is a part of the deep that is unknowable, not because of pressure or darkness or cost, but because it is genuinely alien. A world that runs on perceptions and meanings that a sunlit, air-breathing, light-dependent creature like us can approach, but never fully enter. We can map the shape of the trench. We can count its creatures. We can read the genetic traces in its water. But the lived reality of the deep, what it is actually like to hang suspended in that crushing dark, to sense the world through channels we lack, to speak a language of light we cannot read, to live a life fitted to conditions that would unmake us in seconds. That may remain forever closed to us. We can know about the deep. Whether we can ever truly know the deep from the inside, the way it knows itself, is a different and much harder question. And the honest answer is probably no. And then there is time. Because the deep does not only exist in a different space than we do, it exists in a different time. A flow of time so slow, so patient, so vastly stretched beyond the rhythm of the surface that it makes our entire history feel like a single, held breath. Up here, in the bright, loud world, everything is fast. Things are born and grow and rush and die on the human scale, the scale of seasons and years and lifetimes, the scale of news and weather, and the quick, bright churn of events. But down in the deep, where the body now lies, time runs differently. There is almost no food, almost no warmth, almost no energy of any kind. And so life slows down to match. The creatures of the deep grow slowly, move slowly, age slowly, on a clock so unhurried it is hard to even hold in the mind. There are corals in the cold deep that grow by the width of a thought each year, and individual colonies of them that are thousands of years old, alive now in the dark, that were already alive and growing when the first human cities were being built, that have stood in the same cold black water through the entire span of recorded history, keeping a time so patient that all of human civilization is, to them, a recent event. There are creatures in the deep that may live for centuries. There are fish drifting slowly through the cold dark that were alive before your great-grandparents were born and will be alive after your descendants are gone. There is a kind of clam dredged from the deep that lived for more than 500 years. A single animal, alive and quietly filtering the cold water through the rise and fall of empires, through every war of the last 5 centuries, through everything that has ever happened in the bright, fast world above, indifferent to all of it, keeping its own slow time on the deep floor. And in the rock beneath the seafloor, in the sediment kilometers down, there are living cells that divide perhaps once in hundreds or thousands of years, alive by a definition we are still arguing over, riding out the millennia in the dark, on a clock so slow it is nearly indistinguishable from stone. The body that fell into the trench fell out of fast time and into slow time. The panic at the surface, the racing heart, the desperate human urgency to live, all of that belonged to the quick, bright world above. Down here, none of it means anything. Down here, the body will be taken apart not in an instant, but over a long, unhurried while, on the deep's own patient schedule. And the matter that was a human life will be folded into a world that does everything slowly, that has been doing everything slowly for hundreds of millions of years, that will go on doing everything slowly long after the last human clock has stopped. The deep does not rush. The deep has never rushed. The deep has all the time there is. And there is a strange consolation buried in that, if you are willing to look for it. We live our lives in such a hurry. We measure everything against the brief, frantic span of a human existence, and against that span, the deep's slowness can seem almost like death, a place where nothing happens, where time barely moves, where a creature can live for 500 years and never see the sun. But maybe that is only how it looks from up here, from inside the rush. Maybe the deep's slow time is not death, but a different and older kind of life, patient, enduring, unbothered, going on and on in the dark with a steadiness that the frantic surface world has entirely lost. The corals do not mourn the centuries. The 500-year clam did not count its years. They simply lived, slowly, in the cold and the dark, for a very long time. And that was enough. There is a kind of peace down there that the surface cannot offer. The peace of a world that is in no hurry at all, that has nowhere to be, that will still be here, doing what it has always done, long after every urgent thing we ever worried about has been forgotten. I have been telling you the worst version of this story, the version where you fall and sink and are lost. But there is another version of the descent, one that ends not in dissolution but in return, and it is worth telling because it changes the whole meaning of the fall. Because some people do go down on purpose. Not many, a vanishingly small handful across all of history, but they go, sealed in steel, lowered on cables or riding their own engines down, descending the same dark column the body fell through, all the way to the bottom of the trench, and then rising again, back up through the layers, back into the light, alive. And almost every one of them comes back changed. Not by what they saw exactly, though what they saw is beyond describing. They come back changed by what the deep quietly does to the size of a person. Listen to the people who have actually been down there, and you hear the same thing again and again in different words. They describe a fear that goes first. Everyone is afraid of the deep at the start, in that old animal way, the way we are all a little afraid of the dark and the cold and the crushing weight. And then, somewhere in the descent, as the light fails and the dark closes in and the creatures begin to glow, the fear turns into something else, into awe, into a strange, protective tenderness toward a world that no one was ever meant to see. They describe looking out through the small, thick windows of their craft at creatures going calmly about their lives in a place that should be impossible, glowing softly in a dark that has never known the sun, and feeling the strangest thing, not horror, but a kind of love. And underneath the love, a grief at how little the bright world above ever thinks about any of it. There is a particular loneliness in that work, the loneliness of being almost alone in caring about something enormous. To understand, as these people understand, just how vast and how strange and how endangered the deep is, and to watch the rest of the world look the other way, toward the stars, toward the surface, toward anything but the dark majority of its own planet. That is a lonely thing. They are trying to speak for a place that cannot speak, to a world that does not want to listen, about a wilderness it cannot see. And yet they keep going down, knowing how hard it is, how little it pays, how few will ever notice. They keep sending their small lights into the dark, keep pressing their faces to the windows, keep returning to a darkness they have learned not to fear, but to love. Because there is something down there worth knowing. There always is. The same thing that sent the first two men down in their steel ball even after they heard the window crack. The simple, irreducible, deeply human need to know what is there. To look. To not leave the largest part of our own world in the dark, simply because it is dark. And the most striking thing they report, almost all of them in one form or another, is what the deep does to the ego. Up here in the bright world, it is so easy to believe that we are the center of everything, that the world is a stage we walk across, that the story of the planet is the story of us, that life means the warm and the visible and the human. And then you go down, down into the dark, into the largest part of your own world, and you find an immensity of life and time and mystery that has nothing to do with you at all, that never did, that simply is. And the belief that you are the center of things quietly comes apart, and something humbler and stranger, and, I think, far truer, settles into the space where it used to be. That is what the body's fall really measures in the end. Not just depth, not just the thickness of the unknown. It measures the exact distance between the small, bright self that went over the side at the surface, the self full of panic and history and the desperate human conviction that it mattered, that its survival was the most important thing in the world, and the vast, indifferent truth at the bottom, where that self is gently, completely, and without the slightest malice, undone, and folded into something so much larger that the question of whether it mattered stops even making sense. The fall is the distance between I am the center of everything and the world does not need me at all. And almost no one travels that distance and comes back the same. There is a sound I want to tell you about before we stop falling, because it has stayed with me longer than almost anything else about the deep, and it belongs here, at the bottom, where everything we have talked about comes quietly together. Sound behaves strangely in the deep ocean. It travels far, much farther than it does in air, far farther than light could ever reach in water. There are layers in the sea where the temperature and the pressure combine in just the right way to trap sound and carry it for enormous distances, a kind of natural channel running through the deep, along which a noise made in one part of the ocean can travel for thousands of kilometers before it fades. We discovered this channel originally for the worst of reasons. Navies wanted to hear the submarines of their enemies, and so they laid down vast networks of underwater microphones across whole oceans and sat in quiet rooms on shore listening to the sea. And for the first time, human beings were listening, continuously, to the deep. And the deep, it turned out, was not silent. It was full of sound. The groan of shifting plates, the grinding of distant ice, the rumble of undersea earthquakes, and threaded through all of it, the long, low, almost musical voices of whales, calling and answering across distances that dwarf anything our own bodies could ever shout across. And somewhere in all that listening, the microphones caught something that has haunted the people who study the deep ever since. A single whale, somewhere in the vast, deep channels of the Pacific, that sings at the wrong frequency. Whales of its kind call at one pitch. This one calls at another, higher, off, different from every other whale in the sea. For decades now, we have tracked its voice across the ocean, season after season, a lone signal moving through the deep, calling and calling in a frequency that, as far as anyone can tell, no other whale has ever answered. Some researchers think it may be a hybrid, or an animal with some quirk of anatomy that pitched its voice away from the chorus of its kind. We do not really know. What we know is the sound, a single voice moving through the largest unexplored space on the planet, calling out across a darkness no human has ever crossed, into water that carries its song for 1,000 kilometers in every direction, and waiting, and hearing nothing, and calling again. We do not even know if it is truly alone. It may have companions we cannot detect. It may be perfectly content, by whatever measures contentment means to a whale. We are projecting, of course, taking a sound and pouring our own loneliness into it. But the image is hard to set down once you have picked it up, because it is the same loneliness in the end as the body's. A single thing, adrift in something enormous, calling out or falling into a dark that carries the signal a vast distance and gives nothing back. The whale calling into the deep and the body falling into the trench are, in some quiet way, the same gesture. A small, warm, living thing, alone in the largest dark there is, reaching out toward an answer that may not be there at all, and reaching anyway. Because reaching is what the living do. And the strangest part is that this is the understood sound, the one we can hear, can track, can almost explain. There are others we cannot. There are recordings in the archives, captured once decades ago, that have never been satisfactorily accounted for. Brief, strange acoustic events, logged by machines, played back in quiet rooms by people who were never sure how to feel about what they were hearing. And beyond even those, there is the great, unmonitored hush of the rest of the ocean, where no microphone has ever been laid, where sounds are being made right now that no human has ever heard or ever will. We are not listening to the deep. We are listening to a few keyholes in an enormous closed door, straining to guess at the size of the room beyond from the little that leaks through. And what leaks through? The wail that no one answers, the sounds we cannot name, the vast silence between them, is enough to tell us the room is immense and busy and largely beyond us. The body, settling now into the floor of the trench, lies beneath all of that sound, beneath the whale's lonely call, beneath the groaning plates, beneath the entire conversing deep, in the deepest, quietest, most isolated pocket of the whole vast dark. If the whale's voice ever reached this far, it would arrive faint and slow, a single low note threading down out of the immense black water, traveling further than any voice has a right to travel, in search of an answer that is not, and never was, down here. We listen to it fade. We let it go. And the silence comes back in behind it and holds. So let us stop falling now. Let us stop here, at the bottom of the world, and simply be still. And let the dark have us for a while, the way it has everything else that ever fell this far. Feel how quiet it is. Not the thin quiet of a still room, where the silence is only the absence of noise, and you can sense the world humming just beyond the walls. This is the other kind, the deep kind. The quiet of a place that has almost never had a sound to lose, water that has lain in the dark since long before there were ears to hear it, pressing in from every direction at once, holding everything that falls into it, the way it holds us now, gently, without knowing we are here. There is no echo down here. There is nothing for a sound to return from. A voice would simply leave you and keep going, out into the dark, and never come back. Above us, somewhere impossibly far overhead, the surface is still moving. The waves are still folding over one another in the wind and the sun, the way they have since before anything was alive to watch them. Ships are crossing. People are standing on shores, looking out across the water, certain they can see to the edge of things. They cannot. The edge is here, beneath them, 11 kilometers straight down, in the dark where we are drifting. And even this is not truly the edge, because the deep does not end at the bottom of one trench. It goes on, in other trenches, in the vast unmapped abyss between them, into places we have no way to reach and no real way to imagine. A darkness this darkness is only the smallest part of. The snow is still falling. It never stops. All the way down through the kilometers of black water, the soft, pale rain of the dead is still drifting, the way it has fallen without pause for hundreds of millions of years. The slow, steady descent of everything that dies in the bright world above, sinking forever into the dark, to feed a world it never knew. The body fell with that snow, as one flake of it, and now it has reached the bottom and joined the floor, and the snow keeps falling over it, layer by patient layer, burying the memory of it beneath the accumulating dust of the dead, until in time there will be nothing left to mark that anything fell here at all. And the slow lives go on around it, in the dark, exactly as they did before. The pale scavengers move across the floor on their ancient errands. The single great cells sit in the sediment, alive by a definition we still argue over, indifferent to the argument. Somewhere off in the black, the few hardy creatures of the deepest world drift through water that has never felt a current of human attention, complete in a place that asks nothing of the sky, that has never needed the sun, that does not know we exist, and never has. None of it is waiting for us. None of it ever was. It simply is, and goes on being, in the dark, whether we come or not. And far above all of it, so far that no trace of it reaches down here, the bright world is still telling itself the old story. The story that it lives on a known planet, a mapped planet, a world it has conquered and understood, where the age of discovery is over, and there is nothing left to find. And down here, at the bottom of the deepest place on Earth, in the cold and the dark and the silence, you can feel exactly how small that story is, how thin, how much it leaves out. We are surface creatures. We were born to the light, and we will die in it, almost all of us, never once descending more than a few meters below the bright skin of the sea, never seeing the twilight, or the midnight, or the abyss, or the hadal dark, never laying eyes on a single one of the creatures the body passed on its way down, never visiting the largest part of our own home. The deep is the locked room in the house we were born in, the largest room, the one that holds most of what the house contains. And we will go to our graves, almost all of us, never having opened the door. There is something almost unbearable in that, if you let it land. And yet, and this is the turn, the thing the whole long fall has been bending toward, I am not sure it is only a loss. I think there might be something we need in it, something the deep offers us precisely by remaining beyond our reach. Because we are a species drunk on our own dominion, we have mapped and named and claimed and altered nearly everything we can touch. We have lit up the night, bent the land to our will, reshaped the very climate, reached past the planets. We have grown so used to mastering things that we have nearly forgotten what it feels like to stand at the edge of something genuinely larger than us. Something we do not control, do not understand, cannot conquer, and may never fully know. And then there is the deep. Vast, dark, ancient, indifferent, almost entirely unknown, sitting right beneath us the whole time, the largest part of our own world, refusing to give itself up. There may be something we badly need in the simple fact that it is still there, still unconquered, still beyond us. A reminder, written into the very planet we live on, that we are not the masters of everything, that most of our own world does not answer to us, does not care about us, does not even know we exist, that there is still a place, the largest place, where we are small and late and ignorant and unwelcome, and that has gotten along perfectly well without us for billions of years, and will get along perfectly well without us after we are gone. The body taught us that in the end. It fell out of the small, bright world that believed it was the center of everything, and it fell and fell, and the deep received it the way the deep receives all things, without notice, without malice, without the faintest stir of recognition. And somewhere in that long descent, the idea that any of it was ever ours to keep quietly came apart in the dark. There is no fear in it now. The fear was a surface thing. It belonged to the part of us that still believed it could be saved, that still measured the distance back to the light. Down here, past all that, the fear thins into something else, something closer to awe, something almost like peace. To be smaller than you have ever been, in a dark older than anything the mind can hold, and to feel, instead of terror, a vast and quiet calm. The calm of finally letting go of the idea that you were ever the most important thing in the room. There is one more thing the deep may be holding. Down in the dark, the body fell through. And it is the strangest possibility of all. And I have been saving it for last, because once you have heard it, the fall reads differently. Backwards, all the way up. We have spent this whole descent thinking of the deep as a place life goes to end. A grave. A dark, cold bottom where things fall and are consumed and disappear. But there is a growing suspicion among the people who study these things that the deep is not where life ends at all. It may be where life began. Scattered across the deep ocean floor, in the dark, far from any sunlight, there are places where the planet's inner heat breaks through. Vents in the seabed where scalding, mineral-rich water pours up out of the rock. Water charged with chemistry, water hot enough to melt lead, jetting into the freezing dark. And around these vents, in some of the most extreme conditions life has ever been found in, there are entire, thriving communities of living things. Dense crowds of creatures clustered around the hot mineral breath of the planet, found nowhere else, depending not on the sun at all, but on the chemistry of the Earth itself. When we first discovered them, only a few decades ago, they overturned one of our deepest assumptions about life, that everything alive ultimately depends on sunlight. These creatures do not. They live on the planet's own heat and chemistry, in total darkness, in a way that nothing on the sunlit surface does. And that discovery cracked open a possibility that has haunted biology ever since. Because conditions like those, hot, dark, chemically rich, deep beneath the sea, far from any sun, are very much like the conditions that existed on the early Earth 4 billion years ago, when life first appeared. And so, a growing number of scientists now suspect that life did not begin in some warm, sunlit pool at the surface, the way we used to picture it. They suspect it began down here, in the dark, around the vents, in exactly the kind of deep, hot, lightless place that we have spent this whole story falling into and calling a grave. Think about what that would mean. It would mean that the deep is not the place life goes to end. It is the place life came from. It would mean that the bright, sunlit world up at the surface, the world of forests and faces and everything we have ever loved, is the young part of the story. The recent migration upward, the descendants who climbed out of the dark and into the light and forgot where they came from. It would mean that when the body fell into the trench, it was not falling away from the world of the living. It was falling home. Back down, through all the layers, to the deep, dark birthplace of everything that has ever been alive. The original cradle, the place it all started, the lightless, ancient nursery of life on Earth. And we have barely looked at it. That is the part that should stop you. The place that may have given rise to life itself, the deep ocean, the vents, the dark, is the same place we have explored less thoroughly than the surface of the moon. The answer to the oldest question there is, the question of where life came from, may be sitting down there right now, in the dark, in the chemistry of some vent or some undiscovered creature, waiting in a place we keep choosing not to go. We turned our faces up toward the stars, looking for the origins of things, for the meaning of things, for some answer to where we came from and why we are here. And the answer may have been beneath us the entire time, in the dark water under every ship we ever sailed, in the deepest trenches we have visited fewer times than the moon. And there is a clock running against all of it, because the same deep that may hold the origin of life is also, right now, being eyed for what it can be made to yield. There is mining interest in the deep ocean floor, in the metals that lie scattered across the abyssal plain in slow-formed nodules, in the minerals around the very vents that may have birthed life, in the strange chemistry of deep-sea creatures that might hold new medicines, new compounds, new value to a surface world that is always hungry for more. There is a real prospect that we will begin to industrialize the deep, to send machines the size of buildings down to the floor of the world, to scrape it for what it holds, before we have even finished discovering what is down there. And that may be the most haunting form of the whole story. Not just that we might damage the deep, but that we might damage it before we have understood it. That we might erase species we never named, chemistries we never read, possibly even the very record of where life began, without ever knowing what we were destroying. To drive something extinct that you knew existed is a tragedy. To drive something extinct that you never even discovered, in a place you never bothered to explore, for a profit measured against an ignorance you never lifted, there is a particular kind of poverty in that. We would be burning a library we never opened, in a language we never learned, to keep ourselves warm for a single night. And the deep cannot speak for itself in any of the rooms where these decisions get made. It has no voice. It does not lobby. It does not vote. It simply continues, in the dark, doing what it has done for 4 billion years, while a species that has seen almost none of it decides its fate based on what that species needs this decade. The body knew none of this, falling. The creatures at the bottom of the trench know none of it. The vents breathe their hot, mineral breath into the freezing dark, exactly as they have for longer than there have been eyes to see them, indifferent to the machines that may be coming, indifferent to the race between knowing and consuming that is being run, right now, in our own moment, over the fate of the oldest and largest and least known part of our own world. The deep does not know we are coming. It has never known anything about us, and whatever we decide to do with it, it will simply receive, in silence, in the dark, the way it has received everything else that has ever fallen into it, including, somewhere down there now, settling into the floor of the deepest place on Earth, the quiet remains of a body that began this whole long fall. So we will leave it here, at the bottom, in the dark, the way we found it. We will leave it exactly the way we found it, because nothing we have done tonight has changed it in the smallest degree. We came down with our questions and our small, warm, wondering minds, following a single falling shape into a dark no living person can truly enter. And the deep received our attention the way it receives everything, without notice, without resistance, without the faintest stir of recognition. And now it will let us go the same way, and close behind us, and forget. The silt the body raised will settle. The snow will keep falling. The dark we borrowed for an evening will go back to being what it has always been, unentered, unwatched, complete. And if no one ever falls this far again, if no living mind ever drifts down through this particular patch of black, The deep will not mark it, and will not mourn it, and will go on exactly as it would have anyway, falling away beneath the waves into a silence that was never ours to break. That is the truth the trench keeps, the one the whole long fall was bending toward. The world you live on is not the bright, thin skin you walk across in the light. That is the smallest part of it. The world is mostly this, mostly dark, mostly cold, mostly water, mostly silence, mostly unwatched and unmapped, and entirely unbothered by the brief warm species that named itself the master of the planet, and never once went down to see the largest room in its own house. We are very deep now. The dark is total. The pressure is immense. The cold is the cold that has never changed and never will. And all around, in every direction, there is only the water. The endless, patient water, going down past anywhere we will follow it tonight, into places no story has ever entered, because no one has ever been there to bring one back. This is as far as we go. Not because the deep ends here. It does not. It falls away below us still, into trenches we have never reached, and an abyss we have only begun to imagine. But because this is the edge of what one telling can hold. The rest is for the dark to keep. The rest is for some other time, some braver and humbler people than we have yet learned to be, to come down and stand at the edge of, the way we have stood at the edge of it tonight. So let us simply stop here and drift, and let the dark have us for one last moment. Feel the cold. Feel the weight of all that water. Feel how small you are, and how old this place is, and how little of it you will ever see. There is no fear in it now, only the slow, suspended quiet of a world that does not need you, holding you anyway, for as long as you are willing to stay. Far above us, somewhere we can no longer see, the surface is still moving. The long, slow swells lifting and falling in the wind and the light, wave after wave after wave, the way they have since before anything was alive to watch them. Down here, none of it reaches us. Down here there is no wind, and no light, and no morning coming. Only the deep, and the cold, and the silence, and the slow, endless drift of the snow, falling past us, falling below us, falling on into a dark that has no bottom we will ever truly find. That is the feeling to carry up with you, if anything comes up at all. Not the facts, not the depths or the pressures or the numbers that try and fail to hold the scale of it. Just the strangeness. The quiet, enormous, humbling strangeness of a place so close you could reach it by nightfall, and so unknown that we have seen less of it than we have seen of the surface of the moon. It is down there now. It will be down there tomorrow. It will be down there long after this voice has stopped, and you have gone back to the light and forgotten, for whole years at a time, that it exists at all. And then, some evening, you will stand at the edge of the sea, and you will remember. And the surface will look different to you, the way it never can again. You will look at the bright, flashing skin of the water, and for just a moment you will feel, underneath it, all of that dark, all of that depth, all of that ancient, unwatched world falling away beneath your feet. And you will understand, in a way you never quite did before, that you have spent your whole life standing on the lid of something vast. And somewhere far below all of this, where it has always been, where it will always be, the ocean goes on falling into the dark, past the last depth anyone has ever reached, past the deepest mark on every map, down into the part of the planet that has no witness and has never had one. In silence, in cold, in a patient and endless dark, without us. The last wave breaks over a quiet shore somewhere and pulls back and is gone. And beneath it, the deep continues the way it always has, in silence, without end.